Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently, and Thriving Teams, When Teams Unite, Align and Achieve. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently. I interview thought leaders from across the globe. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast. Many leaders that I work with are feeling a real shift beneath them right now. The questions that keep coming are, how do I lead well when the context keeps changing? How do I keep my people focused when I'm not always sure what's coming next? And how do I prepare my team for the future that looks nothing like the past? So today's guest has been thinking deeply about exactly those questions, and she was thinking about them long and before most of us were. I'm joined by Caroline Stokes, a global leadership strategist, certified executive coach, and author of Aftershock to 2030, a CEO's guide to reinvention in the age of AI, climate, and societal collapse. Caroline is a member of Thinkers50 Radar Class of 2026 and was shortlisted for the Thinkers50 Leadership Award in 2025, placing her among the world's top emerging voices on the future of leadership. A former Sony executive who contributed to the launch of PlayStation, Caroline is one of a few global authorities on psychological and strategic leadership reinvention. Her work's been featured in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Forbes, and Entrepreneur, and she speaks at institutions including the World Bank and the United Nations. Her 2019 TEDx talk forecasts much of the disruption leaders are navigating right now. So welcome, Caroline, to the Thriving Leaders podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So you've got all these awards recently, such as the Thinkers50 Radar Class and Thinkers50 Leadership Award. How did that all come about and what does that mean to you?
Oh, thank you. Well, actually, I was nominated. So a bit like an Academy Award, nominee. You kind of milk it a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm a nominee. How does it feel to be? Well, it was huge. It was absolutely huge because the book only came out last summer. And sorry, I should think Northern Hemisphere. So it would have been your winter,
Okay.
2025 in July. And basically, when a book comes out, it's exhausting. It's probably the most exhausting thing in the world. And usually there's this really long tail whereby really hears about it. Malcolm Gladwell, said, "Oh, it took me 3 years before my book got any recognition when he first started with The Tipping Point." I'm like, well, it's out, great, okay, whatever. And then within a few months, I was on the Leadership Award shortlist at Thinkers50. So it was a really big deal. And I kind of had a bit of whiplash with it, to be honest, because I didn't expect it. And I think it helped me realize I'd really kind of touched a nerve with what was happening in the world right now from a leadership perspective. And what does it mean to me? I mean, apparently the Financial Times called Thinkers50 the Oscars for management thinking, so which is quite a nice handle to be able to say when I'm talking to people about it, because the majority of people don't know anything about Thinkers50 unless you're in those circles. It doesn't have the same profile as the Oscars, but
It should. Yeah.
it's a big deal. Yeah.
Awesome. So for our listeners who might be new to your work, how do you describe what you do and why it matters?
So I do lots of different things. So I think what I want to do is kind of just give you a quick background, and I will be really quick because it's going to be boring otherwise. But I'd worked in corporate for a really long time, was really trying to find the right way to make an impact, because I could see the challenges in organizations. Even from the time I was working at PlayStation, I could see people weren't necessarily happy doing what they were doing, or people were being hired and I couldn't work out why, and all sorts of interesting observations looking at the systems all over the place. But I was very interested in technology from the very beginning. I was actually looking at a piece of coverage in an industry publication in 1991, which talks about me joining Virgin Interactive specifically at that time. And I'm in this not press release, but in the media saying that I'm really excited about the space shuttle simulation game. So fast forward to 2026. And this year I finished the MIT's new space economy certification. I've done various other MIT courses. I was an executive headhunter searching for CEOs. I've just had a really diverse career, reinventing myself pretty much every 2 to 3 years, trying to learn as much as I can at each stage. And it was all about, I mean, I'm the ripe old age of 54 now. And apparently, I'm supposed to be retiring next year, which I can't see happening until I'm probably 80. But what's important right now, and I'll explain what I do, is that people understand where they are right now so then they can move forward in a very deliberate way. And that's why I wrote Aftershock to 2030. But essentially, I'm a leadership strategist. I like to call myself an aftershock strategist. Alvin Toffler came out with the book Future Shock back in 1970, way before you were born, and actually 2 years before I was born. So I can safely say, you know, he was the OG in terms of determining how we were going to handle the technology evolution and how we would respond to it, you know, shock after shock after shock that we've experienced, from the facsimile to the internet to mobile phones. You know, he projected how we would respond to the change and how fast the changes would come. So he was right. And so I'm a coach. I support leaders in that evolution. I help people reinvent themselves so they're ready for dealing with these constant shocks that we're dealing with from a climate foremost perspective, because you're in Australia, you know exactly what's happening from a climate perspective and how it's been impacting your country for decades. And the rest of the world is also now feeling it. They're not waking up fast enough. They haven't woken up as quickly as Australia did to the challenges. And I essentially support those people because it's a very challenging time for people to adapt from the old paradigm to the new paradigm. And there are just so many systems, threads, and that need to be understood to be able to go, okay, this is what I need to do next to move on.
Mm. Like, because the book title is a bold title, you know, Aftershock to 2030, and the breadth covering AI and climate and all the societal changes that are happening. So why is it such a turning point right now for us?
Well, it's a turning point. I mean, I can't speak to Australian politics, but I can speak a little bit. I live in Canada, so I have a neighbor called the United States of America, and we're going through a second, how would I call it? Second term of having Trump as the leader. And we knew from the first time that was a dress rehearsal for the kind of shock that he performed. And everything changed where he was able to get away with making disparaging comments, basically breaking every single rule. And it made way for CEOs to obviously behave in a very different manner as well. Whereas when you see those shifts in leadership and you have the majority of employees and customers actually wanting things done in a different way, and you also see from a climate perspective that we're rapidly not approaching the necessary net zero goals by 2030. You look at those two systems, and you've got the societal upset with obviously AI acceleration. You've got the geopolitical situation. You've got the institutional challenges that are happening. And it's a very, very confusing time because most of us are unable to actually comprehend what should I be doing. Often it gives us an invitation to, you know, behave badly, because there are a lot of people behaving badly, becoming more morally bankrupt. And the issue with that is that it's like, well, there's going to be a time very soon that a lot of leaders are going to be forced to shift. And I like to preempt that situation by explaining to CEOs in particular and leaders that want to evolve into that level what really needs to be done, because the products that we're selling now, the services that we're selling now, when you take into consideration all the changes that are happening with AI technology, having the right people in the right organizations to be able to be competitive and to actually, this sounds a bit mean, but relevant, is probably the biggest challenge of our time. So we need CEOs to think in a polymathic way to be able to advance, to actually be relevant, to actually be in a position whereby the company will endure, can sustain itself. And a lot of boards are expecting a level of insurance from their CEOs to be able to adjust. And the issue is, I mean, I'm just thinking about your listeners right now. They may be nodding their head and thinking, well, what can I do about this? And the issue is that, you know, unless you have an enlightened, may sound a bit too woo-woo, but unless you have a CEO that really is able to grasp the fact that they are in a role where they need to adapt and they need their people to adapt with the organization for future relevance, you know, you're going to see the writing on the walls with the CEO that maybe the company isn't going to hang around very long. And what got me actually wanting to write this book was, it was about 2023. And funnily enough, I was at Thinkers50 and I was in a Starbucks. I was in London at Thinkers50 in a Starbucks in a line. And I heard this woman that was clearly in a banking institution say, I think I'm going to leave the company in April, you know, when I get my bonus. And I thought to myself, well, first of all, why is she leaving? What is wrong with the organization? Is it because she wants to be in a different company? Is it because from a values perspective, it isn't going to work out? Does she want a sabbatical? What was the reason? But it was the fact that she said that out of the blue, and I was just listening, and boy, did I want to jump into that conversation. But it made me realize people are making decisions that they may not fully understand. They may not be able to communicate effectively. And this is 2023, so this is 3 years ago.
Really?
What they need to do to evolve. And sometimes it can be such a gut feel that the company is going nowhere because the leadership is behaving in the old paradigm, not the new paradigm. They're blinkered, they're in denial. And when that happens, people within the organization can feel it, but they can't work out why they need to move forward in some way. And that's like such a missed opportunity, because once you're able to say, I don't want to work with this company anymore because of X, Y, and Z, they're then able to move on and with great clarity be really on point for the interviews that they're going to be inevitably moving into or setting up their own organizations. So it's just a very, very interesting time that we're in right now for people to understand what they stand for, what they need to move into, what they're going to tolerate, what they need to learn so that they're able to be relevant, especially in the AI age.
Yeah. It's funny because sometimes it feels like a gradual transition that we go through, but then we kind of have these moments like COVID where we get almost whiplash to different ways of leading and what's required of us. And I'm not sure if this term was a global term, but in Australia after COVID, there was a phase where we talked about quiet quitting. So where people were still at work, showing up every day for a paycheck because they didn't quite have the energy to leave yet, or they might be like, oh, I'm waiting for my next bonus to come through and then I'm going to see what the market's, so I'm just going to kind of sit around for the next year to find the next opportunity, which creates huge disengagement as well.
100%.
You talk about polymathic leadership is required of leaders. Like, first of all, what is that? But also, what's the shift that you're wanting to see in leaders and how has that actually emerged? Has it been gradual or has it been ongoing or has it been like a point in time? Like, what's your view?
Everything is really slow, but fast at the same time. So we've got technology moving at, you know, the speed of light. We just know that. Things are just evolving so quickly. It's hard to keep up. It's hard to sit and work out what is happening. I'll give you an example. So in February, I think, of 2025, in the middle of your summer, I wrote an article because X had just been absorbed into XAI, which is Musk's, company, and I immediately connected the dots of, this is where technology is evolving. He's got the whole stack. He's vertical, horizontal. He's going to be creating the new civilization, and it is not going to be built on land. And people going, what are you talking about, Caroline? What the heck are you talking about? It's like, oh my gosh, I can see the future. Boom. Just from that move, just from that play. And just last week, SpaceX, there was the IPO, SpaceX IPO, and it became the biggest IPO in history. And how that's working and what is happening there, and the incredible opportunities, and I'll explain what the opportunities are in a second, that will be provided to us on the planet, and I will explain in a second. But then the following week, yesterday, on the 16th of June, SpaceX acquired Cursor, which is now going to put SpaceX, XAI, Grok, and X in a position where they're going to be able to compete with Anthropic and with OpenAI. So where am I going with this? I sat last night for 2 hours on the couch, with basically whiplashed in my mind, going, oh my gosh, what's next? And trying to work out what's next so I can anticipate the next moves. Because you've got to look around corners, you've got to see through walls. So what do I mean by polymathic? What do I mean by universe? The next civilization not being built on Earth or not being on land. So back then I could identify that there were going to be all of these connecting systems that would be created, which would detach itself from governmental systems. Love him or hate him, Elon Musk is a genius. And he's invested and done all of the things that are enabling us to be connected anywhere, to be able to do anything at any time. And from an Earth observation perspective, forget about Mars, etc. But from an Earth observation perspective, we're going to be able to see ahead from a climate perspective what's happening to the planet, what's happening to our homes down the street, from an insurance perspective, from a banking perspective, from a movement of people. And it from a predictive and analytics perspective, we're going to know what is going to happen next. So where does that provide us with power? That's what polymathy is. You're looking at all of the systems, which means sitting on a couch for 2 hours, basically. No scrolling. And you're thinking, my mind's just been blown. What next? How will Earth observation technology ensure that we can protect, preserve, avoid all of the challenges, the catastrophes that are incoming, the forest fires, all that kind of stuff, droughts, etc., etc. How can we observe so we can then act really quickly without the slow systems that we've had for the past 50 years and more? So we've got the data and we can act and we can save lives essentially, and we can preserve better living. And that requires organizations to understand that the new paradigm that we're in, we have so much data at our fingertips, and we need leaders to collaborate more, better, faster, put egos aside. It's like we can't ever say, well, that's not how we used to do things. Well, as long as it's preserving the planet. That's obviously a lens to look through. But to be polymathic, you've got to think of all of these different systems. And guess what? These systems are constantly shape-shifting. To be able to then feel really grounded in ourselves, to be able to go, okay, I think this is, and you're working with the team, you're working with AI, to be able to put forth a suggested strategy, or not strategy, but suggested next steps to the strategy to ensure that the organizations and the leaders within it are going to be relevant and still able to, continue moving their company forward for customers and for employees to sustain growth.
So, Caroline, you've obviously got a real strength. I would say you're like a futurist, a strategist. You can kind of see around corners and kind of connect these dots. But what about for a leader who might not identify as being strategic, or, how do they process what's happening around them when a lot of leaders are actually feeling quite overwhelmed or unsure of what the impact of all these things actually means for them? What advice do you have for those leaders?
The advice I have is to learn. So, which sounds like hard work, and it is. Learning a particular area of interest is going to be really important. I'll rewind to 2020 when I had the best advice from someone. I had interviewed him for my podcast, which is no longer exists. It was an emotionally intelligent oriented podcast at that time. And I interviewed him and I said, so what is it that we need for the next 10 years? And he said, well, let's just say that I know a load of people at Google that have just handed in their notice because they can see that the next 10 years are going to be very crazy. And they've decided to go and do PhDs. And I kind of took that on board. And that's interesting. Very interesting. And then I was very, very keen. The first thing I wanted to do was actually go and do MIT's course on business sustainability, which is For people that don't know, it's about ESG, environmental, societal, and governmental work. And I'm less about box ticking. I'm really all about understanding the systems. So that was my first move. And that was just a year or two after that conversation. And when I did that, I sat in that course. It only lasted 6 weeks. Anybody can do 6 weeks. And I did it. I got my certification. I felt great. And I remember as soon as I finished it, I said, every CEO needs to do this course. Every CEO. Every employee needs to do this course. Everyone on the planet should be doing this course, because if we understood the pressure and the stress we're putting on planetary resources, Earth Overshoot Day has just been brought forward to July, I believe, 30th of this year, which is the shortest runway we've ever had. When you take into consideration all of these perspectives and how it's going to impact supply chain, how it's going to impact the way we live, how it's going to impact the economy, how it's going to impact everything, basically, we have to then understand how we can create products and services that are actually going to be sustainable, which means we need our companies to be sustainable. So that was then. But here's the thing. When I was on that course at MIT, first of all, they have this product called En-ROADS, ENROADS. And with En-ROADS, it's a simulation. So you're able to move all of these levers and identify what we need to do to try and get to net zero. It's a very interesting tool, and there are lots of other companies that do something that's a lot easier to use. But regardless, that is an MIT approved system. And guess what? Every single person that goes through MIT have to use that as part of their product building strategy, whether it's something for AI or whatever, so they can understand the impact their product, when you think about supply, etc., electricity, where you're getting it from, shipping, etc., what impact it will have on the planet. So I would say learn. And the grave challenge is that I remember the first week of doing that course, they actually said, this is going to be the hardest week because you're going to be receiving some very grim data. But we're going to have to, once you get through that, you can then work out how you can build. And it's avoiding the denial. There's a lot of climate denial. It's avoiding the denial. It's about really wanting to be a part of the solution. So in my book, I dedicate it to our children's children, because I want our children's children to be able to breathe really good quality air. And having that mindset of learning on the planetary limitations and actually finding solutions, and the solutions are there. That business sustainability certificate, 6 weeks, maybe it was 8, was incredibly intense. But you come out of every single MIT course with a product. And that's what transformed me back in 21, 22, whenever it was. And I've just been on the roller coaster of learning through MIT every single year, because it's important to be as polymathic or systems aware as possible. So when somebody says, well, we need to do this, well, you have to look at the risks, you have to look at the second, third order impacts and what have you. And, from a leadership lens, it's less about how you stand up in a meeting. It's about how you think about all of these different systems so everybody collectively can make the decisions. And obviously, making those decisions with AI is going to be more and more important.
So I'm hearing from a learning perspective, there's like that systems thinking. It's also probably using data as well and not being scared of the data, of what it's actually telling us to then help problem solve, collaborate, and come up with solutions that will be useful. So all very, very good skills. I know that in your work, you've talked about there's lots of different intelligences that people need to develop, from emotional intelligence to artificial to environmental, societal, economic. That can feel quite overwhelming, like all the things that you need to learn and be able to understand. In your opinion, where's the biggest gap and where do people start?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Yeah. All right. Where do people start? People start with being curious. Once you can be curious on anything, it just there's a snowball effect. Yeah. So I would encourage people to be, what can I be curious in today? What is my curiosity quotient today on this particular thing? Being open to that and curious and not shutting things down in our minds or avoiding it on purpose. Like sometimes I will avoid things and go, why am I not curious about that? Oh, I need to be curious. Okay. Off I go.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're just tapping out. You're just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I time out. I've got enough information in my head now.
Yeah.
But really, to be curious, what can you be curious about today? And you can go down this path. And I've heard some seriously intellectual people over the years that will say, the more I learn, the less I know. So there's always going to be that. We will always know less. But the great thing is that with, and you know this, I'm sure, which is when you go onto ChatGPT or you go onto Claude, whichever your favorite poison is, you're able to identify what it is you need to learn next. You're able to have a push and pull with it to understand. And really, the entire universe of data are in those systems. You can ask it anything if you're curious enough. It's like the biggest library in the world at your fingertips. And obviously, it's not going to be able to provide models necessarily unless you've got the data there. So if you're a data analyst or whatever, then or a financial analyst or something, you're going to have a different skill set. But in general, going in, being curious rather than avoidant. Curiosity is like a drug. Like once you're like little catnip, once you're able to be curious, the rest will follow. It'll be interesting at parties rather than being the negative person at parties. And I'll just add to that because I think it's an interesting point because I haven't said it ever in my life, which is that I don't know if you've ever gone to a party or you've gone to a business group and everyone's like, oh, AI, oh, it's so terrible, blah, 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 blah. And then everybody just goes round and round in circles about being negative. And then somebody might say, oh, but I like it because of this. And that can go two ways. Somebody might, everyone might go, well, you're the outlier. You don't know what you're talking about. Or people can go, oh, really? It does that? Oh, I didn't know. And then people go off and they start learning. And that's where the curiosity comes in.
Yeah.
So, I'd encourage having a good story to tell about, in a positive way, about an experience that you might have, at parties, at conferences, at the coffee, having coffee in a cafe or whatever it is, to have something positive to share and to try and offer people teachable moments of, I actually learned this on Claude today. I had no idea that it did that, because we all need to learn as this global community on what these phenomenal, currently relatively free tools are able to provide us so we're able to advance our learning.
Yeah. We had Sue Langley on the podcast and she's a positive psychology expert, and she talked about exactly that in terms of if someone says something negative, it's going to fire off all the neural pathways of something that's negative to do with that topic. And likewise, when something's positive, so how do we actually take more of a strengths-based approach?
Nice.
And also Jeff Wexler's just come on the podcast as well. And we've talked a lot about curiosity. And I do think it's such an undervalued skill that leaders really need to adopt and role model, because again, if you're curious, it's going to feed curiosity in your teams. And the link to learning is so prevalent, I think.
I agree. The more we learn, the more fun it is. I mean, like I remember back at coaching school back in, 2013 or whenever it was, which feels like forever ago because it was before, ChatGPT and what have you. But back then there was a real, we were learning about the learning mindset and what does it mean to be a learner. And I remember at the time going, ooh, it's a bit embarrassing to go back to school, isn't it? This was back in 2013. And I think for many of us, it feels embarrassing because we're used to being the expert. But now, if you go to Claude or ChatGPT, whatever, you're able to become an expert in something really quickly if you do a deep dive. And also, really, if you've got technology that's providing you with the expertise like that, and the assessment and the feedback and the guidance and lots of different references within minutes versus maybe taking weeks to do or months to do a report, you can gather all of that data. It's not about being an expert anymore. It's about that relational ability, the emotional intelligence, being able to communicate effectively, to influence and to collaborate that's going to be the most important thing right now. So sharpening your toolkit in at parties or at a conference, when having coffee, doing meet and greets with people is going to be really important, because we now need to be more human than ever before, because we've now outsourced our expertise almost, and now we need to have problem solving abilities, and to collaborate and to influence to get us over the line.
Yeah. I feel like it's just people keep talking about the future being human and we need to be more human. But then sometimes because we sit and can spend hours riffing with Claude or ChatGPT about something rather than having a chat with our peer or a person about that, we're probably even becoming less human in terms of connection. I know you speak a little bit about the loneliness epidemic, but what's the impact of our use of technology on connection and collaboration and teams working together?
There's a big shift right now on using AI in a collaborative way. And I think that this might be due to a lot of AI psychosis episodes that have come about. I know, I will confess, my hyper productivity when I first got my teeth onto ChatGPT was just like mind blowing.
Yeah.
Because, I'm ADHD, don't know if anybody can tell, but when I can get into lots of different aspects all at once, and as a systems thinker, I'm just like, I'm firing on all cylinders. And 5 hours later, it's like, ooh, what happened there?
Yeah.
So, once I weaned myself off that and realized I have to be more strategic in how I use a GPT, I was able to identify, okay, this is now and understandably, from an addiction perspective, it's going to be considered a real challenge for people, and it's going to amplify loneliness. And as you know, I have an entire chapter on that in my book, which is about the CEO being lonely, being the only person making decisions. But then towards the end of the book, it's like, well, how do you actually democratize decision making, which is very scary for the majority of CEOs, because they're used to being the expert. And it's like, well, how do you manage it in a different way? And the book takes you through that journey. But I've just finished writing an article right now for Chief Executive magazine. It probably won't be out for a while, probably in the middle of July, August. And that's really about how individuals that work one-to-one or one to AI, as somebody working with AI, they're more likely to feel lonely and isolated unless they take the path of the organization. Actually, the organization needs to adapt to bring AI as part of the collective so everybody can make the decisions simultaneously. Otherwise, you just have somebody going way over there with decision or thinking and implementation, and the rest of the organization isn't catching up. And that's when people can feel really lonely, because everybody should be thinking and discussing these at around about the same time to ensure that the organization is able to reach its goals. And I have two examples of companies that are doing that really well. Actually, one, NVIDIA calls it Mission is the Boss. And the system that they have is somebody will come up with an idea on what needs to be done to achieve the organization's mission. And they have some kind of AI system. I don't know what it's called. I just had a conversation with somebody a while ago about it. And what happens is that with that system, they're able to identify in the organization who is best for the role, for best to get involved in the cluster. And then that cluster, they may not even know each other. They will bring their thinking together with the AI systems to be able to produce the outcomes. And boom, it's done. Highly democratized. It's not about, oh, I've been in the organization the longest and I feel like I'm the best person for the job. They're able to bring the right people into the role. And I think there's this part volunteering and there's part AI synchronization to make that happen. So that's kind of the future if people aren't doing it already, or they're going to start dabbling. People need to start dabbling with that right now, and to be closer to the actual problems that need solving.
Yeah. The two parts I want to pick up on, one around like the CEO being lonely. I think that's been a thing for quite a period of time, because, people say the cliches like it's lonely at the top, and who do they actually share how they're really feeling about things with, and how can they utilize, what do they share with their teams versus not share with their teams. And I think the power in actually collaborating to make decisions, so decisions sit within a team, is really, really useful. And how we use AI for that, I think, can be really powerful. But then to take it a step further in terms of cross-functional collaboration. Like, I'm a big believer that for us to actually enable strategy within an organization or in a system, that you actually need cross-functional collaboration. And there's been a real sense, I've actually just written an article about how staying in your lane is actually not that helpful. Like, obviously it's useful from a role clarity perspective, but then that forces people to sit back. And yeah, I'm keen to, and you might have a perspective on this, to understand, like, in the future, how do we help teams break down those silos and collaborate cross-functionally across systems, and how to use technology to help enable that too, whether that's with AI. Is there anything you're seeing in the work that you're doing or the research?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd suggest people look into, if they haven't already, it's Frederic Lebleau's, I always get his name wrong, Lacroix's work on teal, on the teal system, leadership system, to get that introduction, or the octopus organization. And by looking at those two, and here's my theory or philosophy on this, which is that, how if you're, to all the wine drinkers and the beer drinkers in the world, you've got people that will say, I absolutely need a Semillon, everything else is terrible. Same thing, and with the beer, it's like, it's got to be Michelob. It can't be anything else. It's like everybody's going to have their preferred management style, leadership style, but guess what? They're all pretty similar. So I would encourage people look into the Octopus organization, look at the system that I have, which is Catalyst Citizen. And then there's Frederic Lacroix's version of the Teal organization and how that works. Once people understand that particular framework of how organizations can collaborate together from a mission perspective, it will then make way. Well, first of all, people will then go, okay, my ego is in the way because I've always wanted to have this position. I've always wanted to tell people what to do. My organization's compensation structure is about this. So this is why I really, really encourage a complete reinvention of an organization. And you kind of need to rip the Band-Aid off quite quickly, in my humble opinion, to make that happen. And then the second aspect is bringing in your chief information officer or your chief technology officer or whomever, specifically to roll that out. And in the book, I talk about the chief coaching officer, which is a concept that very few companies will do. But if you're trying to rapidly adapt the entire organization to a new system, I recommend it's done within a 100-day process. Not, everything then flips a switch on 100 days, but the mindsets that need to be changed. It's a process that takes anywhere between 66 and 100 days. And it requires that kind of all-in type of oomph to make it happen. And that's kind of what I would recommend.
So the 66 to 100 days, where does that research come from?
That's a good question. The 66 days for any organizational shift, it takes about 66 days. So what I do, I have 100-day programs simply because people are so fatigued with leadership change programs after the 100 days. Things should be trucking by the 100-day mark really, really well, in which case it's like, well, hands off, don't want to work with you guys anymore. Not in a negative way. It's just like, you guys now need to work it out yourselves rather than having somebody or an organization supervise and go through that change management. People should be the catalysts and the citizens within the organization to make that happen. They should have learned during that intense period how that works. And then there are other people. I interviewed somebody recently whereby, and this goes some years ago, where 3 years ago when ChatGPT first came out, he had dabbled in his organization. I can't say which organization, but it's a big brand name, toy brand name. He had dabbled in adjusting the creative processes mindset on AI by testing something in a very playful way, because they're toys, so they needed to do it in a playful way. They couldn't do the Band-Aid like you'd expect for a banking organization or a McKinsey's, for example. So what he did was start small. He started really small so he could create that kind of trust in the process. But I think we're so far advanced now, 3 years later. Yes, you can do that, but you're going to find that you're going to have a growing gap of ability. And then the person that's actually quite advanced will probably want to move on if they can't see the rest of the organization moving quickly, which is why I recommend a Band-Aid, rip it off, get it done.
Yeah. Awesome. I like this working between 66 to 100 days because it gives people something to work with. Because, I think about, some of my government clients with restructures that are lasting like 18 months and everyone's in this state of ambiguity for so long. And it's really hard to keep team members focused. So if you're a leader that's navigating organizational change or transformation, what are your 2 or 3 tips that you'd give them of what they need to focus on in those first 100 days?
Start with the mindset.
Mm-hmm.
The mindset is the most important thing. Like, people have got to really air their grievances on the reality that they're in, the denial. So there needs to be some time to process that, and it has to be quite quick. Because what will happen is that if people do not, I'm going to sound a bit vulgar, but if they don't vomit it out, it's going to sabotage, it's going to infect everything. And people go, why isn't, it's really obvious we need to do this, why aren't we doing it? So I really recommend people have that very straight, frank conversation about some of the challenges that they're facing. Having those groups, you can have a coach come in and facilitate that to make it really real, really human. Because guess what? We need the humans to be able to do this, make this adjustment. Most people are going to be scared to do this because there's so much media coverage on that people's roles being moved on or being redundant after a while. And that, I think, has really impacted a lot of people wanting to at least try it and see what they can learn, which is why you need to be curious. So I would say start with curiosity, actually, and then go through the mindset shift, and then map out what the mission is for the organization for long-term sustainability. What is it that customers, what is it that the company really needs to deliver? And for everybody to agree on that and discuss what that looks like and what needs to change. A lot of people will, with AI, for example, they'll say, oh, we need to work on this Q&A thing, blah, 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 blah. That's the big problem. But if the rest of the organization isn't following with it, then it doesn't really make sense. And this is why I recommend a real stop, an actual stop. Now, obviously, products will continue to be sold. Distribution still needs to happen. Supply still needs to come through, procurement, etc. E-commerce will need to continue happening. There's that. But I'll give you a great example, which is actually quite appropriate because we've got FIFA on right now. My good friend, who unfortunately he passed, I write about him in my first book in 2019, Simon Humber. He was the creative director of FIFA, the video game by Electronic Arts. And what they would do is they would have 2 different groups. They would have the group working on the product that would be shipped, let's say, in the September. And then they would have the pre-production group working on the next iteration that would be coming out the following year. So that by the time this first game would be out in the September, everybody would be able to, you hand the baton to that team on, well, this is what we're creating next time. So you kind of need to have the 2 groups working together, but they need to be interconnected, because when they're interconnected, so you can see what's available already, what's working, what isn't working, what people love about the product, what they love about the game in his instance, what needs to be tweaked, what the engineers, what the developers are working on that they want to make better. Then you're able to see the big landscape of what actually needs to be evolved and to move forward from that particular point of time. But I believe that having 2 groups, you've got the production that's happening and then you've got the pre-production of what that evolution is going to look like. And there does need to be connective tissue.
I love that. When you said that creating space for people to kind of share their grievances or vomit up, so they're not holding on to
Get it out,
that.
purge.
It's interesting in the context of what we spoke about earlier about those neural pathways of sometimes then it can almost feed all the negativity that everyone's feeling as well. And it's probably an and, not an or, because you spoke about the fact we need to move through that process quite quickly. But what I find is a lot of organizations just talk about all the benefits of the change and to try and kind of brainwash people and don't address how people are actually feeling. How does a leader get the balance right between those 2 without kind of creating more toxicity or more neural pathways in the negative?
Well, I think you're being really polite. And I'm going to say gaslighting employees is not a good move if you want. Otherwise, you're just going to see sabotage everywhere.
Yeah.
There won't be that sense of psychological safety. People can see when Ludmila Preslova wrote a book called The Canary Code. So there are a lot of really smart people that are systems. They see systems. They can see through walls with their eyes closed,
Yeah.
and they can see what's working. And if they say, if they're able to communicate effectively and say, well, I can see all of these things based on what we're trying to do. These are the things that we need to retain or adapt. And then you have people saying, oh, no, that doesn't matter. There's a lot of moral injury that can come from that. And if people don't feel safe to be able to communicate those things, then unfortunately, the good work that people are trying to do is not going to work. So there needs to be that level of transparency. Otherwise, people are going to be gaslighting. There needs to be the pros, the cons, the fears, what does good look like? How are we going to really mess it up? What does bad look like in 3 months' time if we really mess it up? What does good look like? How would we get to good? How do we avoid the bad? How do we communicate more effectively to ensure that we're all on the same mission? And what systems has the organization been perpetuating and holding on to that has been encouraging those those systems to create the level of outcomes that haven't been working historically? Because that's the other thing. There'll be loads of people in the organization, as I'm sure you know, that will say, you know what, this thing that we keep doing, it's actually impacting everything. Why don't we reinvent that? And a lot of people go, no, let's just put a pin on that. We don't need to do that. If we do that, it's, because people want a sense of control. And that is going to be a level of toxicity. So it requires everybody to be really, really frank. And this is why I really use the term reinvention, because we are in a time where the old rules no longer apply.
Yeah. You used the language before, and it's in your book, about a catalyst citizen for a leader.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean, and what does that actually require in terms of the reinvention of a leader?
So I see everybody as a catalyst and a citizen. So a lot of people might march into the office and go, I'm a catalyst. I just come up with all of these ideas and I want everybody to do it. That's not what I'm talking about. Everybody has to embody each one. So with the citizen, you're looking at the organization, what it needs to, the rituals, the performance, the communication styles, what the company is aiming for, and ensuring that everybody is kind of aligned with that. So to be able to move seamlessly. Now, that is really, really hard, because in the old paradigm that for many of us we're still in, it can be really quite rigid. And I have to say, I still have to work on myself. This is not an easy thing to do, whereas it's like you have to stop yourself in mid-flight, because we have the old system. The older I am, the worse it is. So I'm having to reinvent my own brain, which is why I love neuroplasticity, because when I can feel a headache go along here, I wish I was kidding, when I can feel it right there, it means I'm literally painfully changing my behaviors or my operating system. And one of the things I know is that when we're changing things at that kind of scale, it's exhausting. People will be tired. But if it's all happening at the same time and people can support each other, then it's good. So catalyst and citizen, let's give an example for you. Let's say you're in an organization, and in your organization, you've got an idea. And it's going to impact the mission. It's going to create great ROI. The customers are going to love it. That your colleagues are just like feeling really happy about that. So you're being a catalyst in that moment. And you may find that if other people aren't on that same page, you're just going to have resistance, because they may look at you and go, well, she doesn't have the title for this. This is something that we can't do. So you have to ensure that the whole organization is able to adapt around that concept and that way of being, which is why I recommend Teal, which is because his Teal program has been around for a really long time, and the Octopus Organization, which is what Harvard Business Review's book is all about. So you have to adapt the organization. You will find great leaders that can do both of those things simultaneously, naturally, where they are able to embody the system for the future development, but they also have ideas. They're able to just move seamlessly towards that. So that's why it's really important. Like if you were to go in and you can see that there's going to be pushback, no matter how enthusiastic you are, because maybe you're not embodying how the organization is, it's going to be really, really difficult. So it requires a complete overhaul. It's a complete rethink of how the organization operates. It's a brand new operating system.
Yeah. So it's both systemic, but also a shift for leaders as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's going to be the hardest thing. And this is where this is going to sound really unpopular. Really sorry. But where people are going to go, well, no, this isn't the organization I want to be in. And then they realize actually they're the ones that are behind.
Yeah. Which for the organization probably is a good, when people do choose to leave because they feel like that's not what they want to be part of, it's probably a benefit for the organization if it does want to have that transformation it's looking for. So our final question that we ask all of our guests, if you could leave our listeners with one message about thriving teams, what would that be?
One message for thriving teams. Take a deep breath. We're going into such a fast-paced world where our brains won't rest. Basically, take a breath, calm down your nervous system so your brain can actually do the thinking, because hair on fire behavior that we inherited since the pandemic is not going to get us where we need to go. So taking a breath, identifying what you need to learn, how the organization needs to adapt, how teams and people need to adapt as well, and what technology will support that acceleration. That's pretty much it. That's the tip.
I love it. Thank you, Caroline, so much for coming on the Thriving Leaders podcast. I've really enjoyed our chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful meeting you.
Awesome. Whoa, what a conversation with Caroline. I love how she kept bringing everything back to something really practical, even when we were talking about some pretty big, complex ideas. I completely agree with her point about what becomes more valuable as AI takes over more of the technical and analytical work. And the answer is us, our ability to connect, to influence, to problem solve with other people. The tools can do the analysis. What they can't do is build the relationships and the trust that make it possible to act on it together. So if you've been wondering what to prioritise in your own development right now, that's probably your answer. A few things I'm taking away. First, curiosity is a starting point. Not strategy, not a new framework, not a technology rollout, just what can I be curious about today? Caroline said it and I loved it. Curiosity is like a drug. Once you start, the snowball effect is real. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by everything that's changing, that's probably the best place to begin. Come from a learning mindset. Second, her point about gaslighting employees during change. I see this often. Leaders who focus entirely on communicating the benefits of a change while completely avoiding how people are actually feeling about it. Caroline was clear. If people don't get the chance to process what they're losing or what they're afraid of, that energy doesn't disappear. It just shows up as resistance, disengagement, or quiet sabotage. The antidote is transparency and the courage to have a frank conversation about both the good and the hard. And third, that closing piece from Caroline. Take a breath. Calm your nervous system so your brain can actually do the thinking. In a world that keeps accelerating, that's not a soft suggestion, it's a leadership strategy. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to share it with leaders who are navigating change or feeling the weight of everything that's happening right now. And if you haven't already, I'd love you to subscribe so you don't miss our next conversation. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, facilitation, keynote speaking, or executive or team coaching, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful tips on leadership and team development, as well as our podcast. You can also grab a copy of either of my books on our website, and it's also available on all good online retailers, including Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive. Please subscribe.